I don't believe you're ever going to walk again. And I can't build my life around a hope that never changes. I've fallen in love with someone else. I can't stay here anymore.
She said I would never walk again. And she left me at the moment I needed her the most.
Good morning, Mr. Reed. Well, this is something new. I'm Sarah Whitford, your new nurse.
Please, can I ask for a favor? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means a lot and helps us bring you more exciting and heartfelt stories. Thank you. Now, let's dive into the story. He once controlled billions of dollars and built machines that could think like humans. Now, he could not even stand up to open his own window. For 17 months, Alexander Reed did not speak a full sentence to anyone. Not to his doctors, not to his family, not even to the woman who once promised to marry him. Then one rainy morning, a new nurse walked into his penthouse and refused to leave, even when he tried to break her. Alexander Reed was not an ordinary billionaire. At 36, he built Reed Robotics and AI Systems, one of the fastest-growing AI robotics companies in the world. His machines powered hospitals, factories, defense systems, and smart cities. News channels followed his every move. Investors called him a genius. His face was everywhere. Magazines, conferences, global tech summits. He was admired. He was feared. He was unstoppable. Until the night everything ended. Alexander was an only son. His parents had passed away years before he built his empire, back when he was still young enough that their faces had softened into something closer to feeling than memory. He rarely spoke of them, not out of pain exactly, but because there was so little left to speak of. The oldest thing he could remember, older than any boardroom, older than any birthday he could place a date to, was George's voice, steady and familiar, somewhere in the background of a house that had otherwise gone quiet too early. It was a rainy October night. Alexander was leaving a charity tech event. His black car moved slowly through the rain. Then another vehicle lost control. A violent crash. Glass shattered. Metal twisted. Sirens filled the silence. When emergency responders arrived, Alexander was alive, but barely. His spine was severely damaged. Doctors saved his life, but stole his ability to walk. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital room he did not recognize, tubes in his arms and a strange foreign heaviness in his legs. He tried to sit up out of habit, the way he had done every morning of his life. Nothing moved below his waist. He tried again, still nothing. A nurse rushed in and gently pressed him back down, telling him to stay calm, that the doctor would explain everything. He did not remember screaming. He only remembered the silence that came after. The diagnosis was delivered in careful, clinical language. Severe spinal cord injury, partial to complete loss of function below the waist. Possible, though unlikely, gradual improvement with months, maybe years, of intensive therapy. No guarantees. Alexander listened without blinking. Then he asked one question. "Will I walk again?" The doctor hesitated, which was answer enough. The first weeks were filled with hope. People promised, "I will always be here. You are not alone. We will get through this together." His fiancée, Evelyn Hastings, held his hand.
Please, talk to me. Don't shut me out. I know you're hurting. We can face this together. Your silence is breaking my heart. I love you. Please don't give up.
She came every day at first. She brought flowers that wilted faster than her visits shortened. She read him updates from the office, sat beside his bed doing her makeup in the little mirror from her purse, told him funny stories about mutual friends to make him laugh. In those early days, Alexander believed her promises completely. He believed that love, like theirs, built over 4 years, 3 of them engaged, could survive anything, even this. But change came faster than words. The physical therapy was brutal in a way no one had warned him about. Every session left him drenched in sweat and shaking with a frustration he had never known in his life of boardrooms and product launches. He was used to solving problems. This was a problem that refused to be solved by intelligence or money or willpower alone. The therapists were patient. Alexander was not. He snapped at them, apologized, snapped again. Progress, when it came in inches. A twitch in a toe. A slight tightening in a thigh muscle. Nothing that looked like walking. Nothing that felt like winning. Months passed. Hope turned into discomfort. Visits became shorter. Calls became rare. Excuses became constant. His friends stopped coming. His relatives became busy. The excuses were always reasonable on their own. A work trip, a sick child, a scheduling conflict. But reasonable excuses, stacked one on top of another, week after week, built a wall just as effectively as cruelty would have. Alexander noticed. He said nothing. He had built an empire by noticing patterns before anyone else did, and this pattern was the clearest one he had ever seen. Even Evelyn, the woman he planned to marry, finally sat beside his hospital bed one evening and said, "I can't do this life with you. I'm sorry." She did not look at him when she said it. She stared at her hands, at the engagement ring she had not yet taken off, and her voice shook, but her decision did not. She told him she had tried. She told him she still cared about him. She told him this wasn't the future she had signed up for, and that she didn't think she was strong enough to be the kind of person this new life required. Alexander listened to all of it the way he once listened to failing quarterly reports, absorbing the bad news before it could reach the part of him that still hoped. 2 weeks later, she was gone. No calls, no visits, no explanation. Alexander did not beg. He simply nodded, and something inside him died that day. Not his body, his trust in people. When he returned to his penthouse overlooking the ocean, he changed. He stopped replying to emails. He canceled therapy. He ignored his company. He refused visitors. And slowly he began pushing everyone away before they could leave him again. Because in his mind, everyone always leaves. The penthouse, once filled with the noise of business calls and late-night strategy sessions, became a silent, sterile place. Alexander spent most of his hours in the wheelchair by the window, watching the tide come in and go out, indifferent to whether he watched it or not. His board of directors sent a replacement CEO to run daily operations. He did not object. He barely acknowledged it. Money kept moving through the company whether he cared or not, and for the first time in his life, he did not care. 3 nurses quit in 1 week. 1 cried. 1 got angry. 1 said he was impossible to work with. The 4th lasted 5 days. The 5th was coming today. The 1st had tried kindness, gentle words, soft reassurances, and Alexander had answered every one of them with silence, so cold it eventually broke her composure in the stairwell, where George found her crying and called the agency for a replacement. The 2nd had tried firmness, reminding him that his attitude would not speed his recovery, and Alexander had told her, in words sharp enough to leave a mark, that he had not asked for her opinion on his recovery or anything else. She left before her shift ended. The 3rd had simply stopped showing up. No call, no explanation, which Alexander found darkly funny, since it was exactly what everyone else in his life had done to him, only faster. Alexander already knew the result. Another failure, another exit, Another disappointment. He sat by the huge glass window, staring at the ocean like it could erase his thoughts. Then a knock. George, the house manager, entered quietly. "Sir, your new nurse has arrived." No response. After a pause, Alexander finally spoke, voice cold and dry. "How long did the last one last?" "5 days." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then this one won't last 3. George had been there longer than anyone. He had managed the household since Alexander was a boy, long before there was a company or a fortune to manage, and he had stayed through every version of the man he raised, in every way that mattered, into adulthood. He remembered the boy who used to whistle in empty hallways, just to hear the sound come back to him. He did not say any of that out loud. He simply nodded and went to bring the new nurse in, quietly hoping, though he would never have admitted it, that this one might be different. The door opened. Soft footsteps entered the penthouse. Not rushed, not nervous, not afraid. That alone was new. Alexander didn't turn. Then a voice spoke behind him.
Good morning, Mr. Reed. Well, this is something new. I'm Sarah Whitford, your new nurse.
Alexander looked at her once, then turned back to the window. "Congratulations," he said flatly. "You've taken the worst job in the world." To his surprise, she laughed. A real laugh, not nervous, not forced, just genuine. That confused him. Most people feared him. She did not. She set her bag down on the counter without asking permission, the way someone does when they intend to stay a while. She looked around the penthouse, at the untouched grand piano gathering dust, at the framed magazine covers. Nobody had looked at in over a year, at the takeout containers George had not yet cleared from the counter. She did not comment on any of it. She simply began unpacking her things, moving through the space like she had already decided this was somewhere she belonged, at least for today. Sarah moved around the room like she belonged there. She opened his medical file. "We have therapy scheduled in 2 days." "No," Alexander said immediately. "No therapy." "Why not?" she asked calmly. "Because I said so." That tone usually ended conversations, but not this time. She simply nodded. "Okay, then we'll start in 4 days instead." Alexander frowned. She was not arguing. She was not leaving. She was adjusting. That was new. He had expected a fight. He had a whole arsenal prepared for a fight. Cruel comments and cold silences he had used successfully on 4 nurses before her. Sarah gave him nothing to fight against. Every sharp edge he threw at her, she simply stepped around, the way water moves around a stone without ever losing its shape. By the end of that first day, Alexander realized, with some irritation, that he had not managed to make her cry, get angry, or quit. He was not sure what to do with that. Hours passed. She brought him coffee. He ignored it. She talked about his routine. He ignored her, but she stayed. Finally, she said softly, "You haven't eaten properly today." "I don't need you," he replied. She smiled slightly. "I know, but you still need food." Silence. Then something unexpected happened. He said, "Bring toast." That was the first request he had made in months. It was a small thing, 2 words, but George, passing through the hallway with a stack of unopened mail, stopped in his tracks when he heard it. He had not heard Alexander ask for anything in over a year. He had only heard him refuse things. George went back to the kitchen and made the toast himself, his hands unsteady with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Days passed. Sarah did not fight him. She did not pity him. She did not fear him. She simply stayed. And slowly she began breaking something inside him, not his body, but his isolation. He started speaking in short sentences, then longer ones. Then one evening, he asked, "Why are you still here?" She paused, then said softly, "Because I promised myself I would never leave someone just because they are hard to love." That sentence stayed in his mind all night. He turned it over in the dark long after she had gone home, long after the penthouse had gone quiet again. He had heard people say they loved him. He had heard people promise to stay. He had never, in 36 years, heard anyone say something that sounded less like a performance and more like a private rule she lived by, something she would have said whether he was listening or not. What Alexander did not know was that years ago, before the accident, he had unknowingly saved Sarah's younger brother by funding a rare hospital robotics program through his company. That program gave her brother critical treatment. She never forgot that name. Alexander Reed. Now fate had brought her back to him, and this time she was not leaving. Sarah had seen his name for the first time on a small plaque outside a pediatric rehabilitation wing, back when she was 22 and terrified, watching her 12-year-old brother relearn how to grip a spoon after a car accident that nearly took his life. The robotics-assisted therapy program that gave him his hands back had been funded quietly, without press releases, by Reed Robotics and AI Systems. She had never met the man behind the name. She had only carried a private, grateful memory of him, tucked away for years, until the day the nursing agency sent her his address. If you are enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means a lot and helps us bring you more exciting and heartfelt stories. Thank you. Back to the story. Weeks passed. Therapy resumed. Slowly, painfully, Alexander began to try. Sarah helped him every step. When he fell into frustration, she stayed calm. When he shut down, she waited. When he pushed people away, she did not move. And slowly, he changed. He laughed once, then again, then more often. George, the house manager, could not believe it. "This is not the same man," he whispered. The sessions were still hard. Alexander still had days where he refused to leave his room, where the frustration of a body that would not obey him boiled over into anger he mostly aimed at himself. But Sarah had a way of absorbing that anger without letting it change her. She would simply sit with him in the silence until he was ready to try again, sometimes minutes later, sometimes hours. She never once threatened to leave the way the others had. She never once used his recovery as a bargaining chip. She just stayed, patient as tide, until he trusted the ground beneath him again. One morning, during therapy, Sarah said, "Try standing, just hold my hand." "I can't." "You can. I haven't walked in over a year. I'll be here." Silence. Then he grabbed her hand and stood. His legs shook, his body trembled, but he stood, one step, then another, then 5 small steps. Sarah gasped softly, not loudly, just emotionally, like she was witnessing a miracle. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Alexander stood there, gripping her hand so tightly his knuckles had gone white, breathing like he had just run a marathon instead of crossed a few feet of hardwood floor. 5 steps. To anyone else, it would have looked like nothing. To him, it was the first proof in 17 months that his body still belonged to him. That night, everything changed. Alexander looked at her differently now, not as a nurse, not as help, but as something deeper. "I don't want you to leave," he said. Sarah froze slightly. "This is not professional," she whispered. "I don't care." And he kissed her, softly, carefully, like someone afraid to lose something precious. She did not pull away, but she whispered, If I stay like this, I will lose my job. Then don't stay as a nurse, he said. Stay as you. The words hung in the room between them, quiet and enormous. Sarah stepped back first, her hand pressed briefly to her own mouth, torn between everything she felt and everything she knew about the lines she was supposed to keep. She had spent months guarding her heart carefully around him, telling herself it was simply compassion, simply a job done well. Standing there, she could no longer pretend that was the whole truth. Sarah eventually resigned. She could not break professional rules. She left a note. I cannot remain your nurse because I have fallen in love with you. That night, Alexander broke again, but differently, not in sadness, in determination. He stood alone. He tried walking again, fell, got up, tried again. He did not call the agency for a replacement. He did not call anyone at all. He simply pushed himself out of the wheelchair in the dark of his own living room, gripping the edge of a table, and forced his legs to hold him the way they had for those 5 brief steps days earlier. He fell twice. Both times he lay on the floor a moment longer than necessary, not out of defeat, but to remind himself why he was doing this at all. He did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark, listening to the building settle, to the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall, to every ordinary sound a silent penthouse makes when there is nothing left to distract from it. Around midnight, he gave up pretending and wheeled himself to the kitchen for water he did not really want, just to have something to do with his hands. Her note was still on the counter where she had left it. He read it standing there in the blue light of the open refrigerator, then again at the table, then a third time before he made himself stop. By 2 a.m, he was still awake, staring at the ceiling, running the same 5 minutes on a loop, the way she had stepped back, the sound of the door clicking shut, the particular quiet that followed. He thought about calling 3 separate times. The first time he actually opened her contact and stared at the little photo she used, taken at some point during a shift, laughing at something off camera. He did not press call. The second time he got as far as typing, "I'm sorry," before deleting it, because sorry felt like the wrong word for wanting someone this badly. The third time, near 4 a.m, he simply set the phone face down on the nightstand and told himself to stop, the way he used to talk himself through a bad trading day. Except this ache did not respond to logic the way the market did. He was up again before 6, unshaven, the coffee George brought him going cold on the side table because his hands weren't steady enough to trust with a full cup. George found the light on under his door twice that week, at hours no one should reasonably be awake, and said nothing about it, only left tea outside instead of asking questions Alexander clearly did not want to answer. Alexander noticed the tea. He did not mention that either. Some things in that house were understood without being said. Sarah did not sleep either, back in the small apartment she had barely lived in since taking his case. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in her coat, the note she hadn't actually needed to write, because she remembered every word of it, replaying itself in her head anyway. She told herself she had done the responsible thing. She told herself this 3 or 4 times, in the specific tone people use when they are trying to convince themselves of something they do not fully believe. What kept her awake wasn't just missing him. It was a colder, more practical fear underneath it, the kind her training never quite let her switch off. She knew how he pushed himself. She knew he had tried to stand without help before and fallen more than once, and that pride would not let him call for the help he needed most nights. Somewhere around 1 in the morning, she thought about the exposed edge of the low table near his chair, about how easily a fall could turn into a head injury if no one was there to catch it. And the fear of that, more than anything romantic, was what finally got her off the bed and into her car. She told herself the whole drive over that she was only checking on a patient, that this was still, technically, within the bounds of what any decent nurse would do for someone she used to care for. She stopped believing that excuse the moment she used her old key and heard nothing but silence inside, and something in her chest went cold and fast, and she was already moving before she consciously decided to run toward the living room. She found him on the floor near the low table, exactly where her fear had pictured him, trying to push himself upright alone in the dark at nearly 2 in the morning. She rushed to him. "Are you crazy?" For a moment, he just looked at her, like he could not fully trust that she was real, and not something his exhausted mind had built out of wanting. Then something broke open in his face, relief so raw it looked almost like pain, and he pulled her down to him right there on the floor, holding on like he was afraid the moment would dissolve if he let go. "I tried to call you," he admitted, voice rough. 3 times. I never once pressed the button." "I know the feeling," she said, and her voice cracked on it in a way that surprised her. "I almost talked myself out of coming about 5 different times tonight." "You came back," he said, still not quite believing it. "I never really left," she replied. "I just needed you to fight for yourself the way I'd been fighting for you." And then she kissed him, not as nurse, not as caregiver, as someone who chose him. That night, he did not let her go home. She stayed, and for the first time since the accident, the penthouse did not feel like a place he was surviving in. It felt, quietly and without fanfare, like somewhere he lived. Later, in the dark, she told him something she had never told anyone else. That this was her first time with a man, that she had spent so many years focused on caring for other people, on her training, on simply surviving her own losses, that she had never made room for this kind of closeness before. Alexander went still when she said it, not out of surprise, but out of a kind of quiet reverence, understanding that she was not just giving him her time anymore. She was giving him something she had guarded her whole life. He held her hand the way she had once held his, steady, unhurried, and told her there was nowhere else he would rather be. 3 months later, Alexander Reed walked into his company headquarters. On his feet, the entire building froze. News spread instantly. "The billionaire is back!" Investors celebrated. Employees cried. The world watched. But he only looked for one person, Sarah. He had insisted on walking through the front doors himself, waving off the wheelchair George had brought just in case, waving off even his own cane for the final stretch across the lobby. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Someone dropped a coffee cup. By the time he reached the elevator, the entire lobby was on its feet, applauding a man who 8 months earlier could not lift a spoon on his own. Evelyn returned, dressed perfectly, smiling like nothing happened. "I made a mistake," she said softly. "I still love you." But Alexander looked at her calmly. "No," he said. "You loved me when I was strong. Sarah loved me when I was broken." He took Sarah's hand. "This is my future." Evelyn left in silence, broken by regret. She had read about his recovery online, the same as the rest of the world, and had convinced herself that enough time had passed to make her welcome again. She arrived with the same practiced warmth she had always used, the same rehearsed vulnerability. But the man standing in front of her was not the one she had left in that hospital bed. He did not need convincing anymore, from her or from anyone. Alexander proposed that night. No grand speech, just simple truth. "Stay with me, not as my nurse, not as my caregiver, as my life," Sarah cried. Yes, they married in a private ceremony. Later, they had a son, and for the first time, Alexander Reed was not a billionaire, not a patient, not a broken man, just a husband, a father, a man who was finally loved enough to become whole again. The wedding was small, held on the same stretch of shoreline he used to stare at through the glass, back when the ocean was the only thing that seemed to understand his silence. George stood at the front, unable to stop smiling through the entire ceremony. There were no cameras, no press releases, nothing for the business world to comment on. Just a handful of people who had actually stayed. Sarah found out about the pregnancy on an ordinary Tuesday, standing in the same bathroom where she had once counted his medications for him. She sat on the edge of the tub for a long time before she went looking for him, not because she was unsure how she felt, but because she wanted to hold the news a little longer, just for herself, before it belonged to both of them. When she finally told him, Alexander did not say anything at first. He simply reached for her hand the way he had reached for it. That first morning he tried to stand, like he needed something solid to hold while the ground shifted beneath him again, this time in a good way. The months that followed were unlike anything either of them had known. Alexander, who had once run a company by instinct and certainty, found himself reading books on infant sleep schedules at 2 a.m, asking Sarah questions he was almost embarrassed to ask. He rebuilt the nursery himself where he could, insisting on assembling the crib with his own hands, even when it took him 3 times as long as it should have. George caught him more than once sitting in the half-finished nursery, just looking at the empty space. The way a man looks at something he still cannot quite believe is his. Sarah's labor came 2 weeks early, on a night with the same kind of rain that had once ended everything for Alexander, and, in its own strange way, brought Sarah into his life. He held her hand through it the way she had once held his, steady, unhurried, refusing to let go even when the nurses gently suggested he step aside. Their son was born just before dawn, small and loud and furious at the world in the way newborns are. And when the doctor placed him in Alexander's arms, his hands, the same hands that had once gripped a table edge in the dark just to stay upright, trembled for an entirely different reason. They named him George Alexander Reed, after the man who had never once left, and after the boy George remembered whistling in empty hallways long before there was a company or a fortune to speak of. When George heard the name, he did not manage a single word. He simply held the baby, and for once said nothing at all, because some things in that house were still understood without being said. People still ask what saved him. Doctors say therapy. Investors say determination. Media says miracle. But Alexander always gives the same answer. It wasn't medicine that healed me. It was the one person who refused to leave when everyone else did. If you enjoyed this love story, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more heartfelt tales. Your support helps us continue creating the stories that make your heart race.